Alright everyone, a huge amount of coping and seething today from the TDS sufferers as they fixate on a single Florida poll, as opposed to aggregates as usual. Link in the description to the rolling latest polls that you get from RCP, Real Clear Politics. As I had predicted before, the Trump verdict is completely meaningless. It hasn't changed the trajectory of the election whatsoever. If anything, it may give Trump a very slight advantage, a bump of a point or something like that. We have new polling now, grain of salt mode, from the latest polling from the last 24 hours. It's Fox News. I tend to value legacy media polling a little bit less, like Fox, CNN, CBS, a little bit less than polling from like a university or something like that. Although they have been close to the mark-ish, I think Rasmussen actually has fallen off a cliff at this point. I don't know what they've done to adjust their aggregated polling, but it doesn't necessarily reflect reality. But the latest polling shows Trump ahead in Nevada, Trump ahead in Arizona, Trump ahead in Florida, and tied in Virginia. This is the second poll that we've gotten, actually, that shows a tie in Virginia. The older polling showed Biden with an advantage, less than the amount that he won by in 2020, Hong Kong supposedly, by a significant margin, but still a 4 or 5 point lead, somewhere around that. That's a fairly comfortable lead. That's what Trump currently enjoys in most of the swing states. And the other day, you had the Emerson polling, actually, and that showed basically the same amount as what we're seeing from Fox. So again, you're getting a scattershot that's building now post-verdict, and it doesn't look like it's really changed the metric. These numbers are effectively the same as they were before. 5 points here, 4 points there, etc. Liberal media and the TDS suffering neocons like the Haley types, they're fixated on Florida. And as well as some of the very, very salty super fans of DeSantis, who, like, DeSantis, I've forgiven him, but there's still a handful of holdouts that are really salty about the fact that he wasn't nominee, saying, well, DeSantis won by, like, 15 points or something. Trump's only ahead by 4. Yeah, in a singular poll. Don't worry, that aggregate will pick up. He will win Florida. It's not a swing state. It's about as competitive as Texas. Don't worry about it. The real ones are Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, technically speaking Georgia, and those are the core swing states. What we're seeing happen, though, in polling, and we have been seeing it both pre and now post-verdict, is that you have a slurry of other states that are competitive, and several states that were conceived of as in play months ago, when Trump was lower in the polls. They were conceived of as competitive, but they've sort of fallen out. North Carolina is one of them. North Carolina is not a swing state at this point. It will go for Donald Trump. I put Georgia on the same list, and I'm leaning towards putting Nevada at this point on the same list. You have had continuous polling showing Trump 5 or more points ahead in Nevada. Some of them he approaches double digits in. In fact, I think some of the older polls, which are outliers, so I don't take them necessarily at full face value, they showed Trump up by 10, 11, I think the top one was 14 points or something like that. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that number. There will be some competition there, but it's likely off the table for the Biden admin unless some major change happens. Trump getting indicted only boosted him in the polls. And when I looked at this, I said, okay, he's the first former president to be indicted for a crime. And therefore, a lot of people at this point, because of the indictment, they've made up their minds, and it's hardened support, either for or against Donald Trump. I can't see that a verdict being reached, his conviction on the charges in the hush money case, really moves the metric much. If anything, it may alienate a few independent voters in one direction or the other, but pretty much everyone else has made up their mind. Most voters in the United States remain partisan. It's less of an aggregated total than it was 10 years ago, but it's still technically a majority. The largest voting bloc is now independent voters, but between partisan Dem, partisan Republican, that's still a majority of the population. So they're generally spoken for. And then you have people who ideologically align hardline either right or left. They're mainly spoken for. That leaves a relatively small cohort of 15 or 20 points. These people have largely ignored these cases going forward, it seems. And indeed, the polling shows that this was what I predicted would happen, that there would be effectively no polling movement. Now you have, though, possibly a competitive Virginia. That would be a double-digit change from 2020. We've got polling that suggests that Minnesota and New Hampshire might follow suit, which would be dire for Joe Biden. The problem for him is that if it looks remotely competitive in a state like Virginia that had been leaning blue, it went for him by double digits in 2020, again, Hong Kong supposedly, and now it's a tie. Where do you find all the ballot printers that you need to overcome what appears to be a huge organic advantage for Donald Trump? If he is indeed ahead by these margins, compared to 2020 certainly, and to some extent 2016. He was ahead in some polling by a point or two in these competitive states in 2016. He never enjoyed anything close to this kind of advantage. He was still generally about even or behind. If we get the same turnout differential as in 2016, and I believe that Dem turnout will be depressed by the fact that Joe Biden is seen as boring and ineffective, mainly as a bumbler, then we would probably end up with a red Virginia. We could end up with Trump winning all of the competitive states. It's entirely possible. He could expand the 2016 map. He could gobble up Minnesota. That looks like it's in play to an extent. He could gobble up Virginia. He could go into New Hampshire, also Maine, although I still think that leans towards Biden. I think that the limited polling that was conducted showing Maine being much more competitive, it's not aggregated for a reason. It's possible, but I think it's less likely. Really, it's all eyes on Virginia at this point. If Virginia looks like it's going to be the crux of the election, the sort of 50-50 middling state that's the closest, it's not going to be Georgia. It's not going to be North Carolina. It's certainly not going to be Florida. It looks like it's not going to be Nevada either. If it starts looking like it's going to be New Hampshire or Virginia, Biden has lost. There aren't enough votes in those states. He could lose the popular vote as well. I realize that recently Republicans have had trouble with the popular vote, mainly because of turnout in deep blue districts in California and New York. There's simply an ingrained popular vote advantage there. If it starts looking, and it is beginning to start looking like that, like Virginia is going to be the hinge upon which the election swings, it tilts things lopsidedly in Trump's favor to a massive extent. It would be better than 2016. He may not take any of those states, but certainly it would show that the competitive states whose demographics over the course of 4 years are still relatively intact, that those probably all go for Trump. Now, then there's the Arizona question, and the question of election fortification. As I've said, while the Uniparty has had 4 additional years to set up their rigging scheme, it's going to be difficult to overcome that kind of turnout differential, that kind of popular vote differential. It's possible, but it's difficult to do. Some of these states are defortified now. Like Pennsylvania is mostly defortified at this point. To an extent, Wisconsin, although I think Biden may have a slight advantage there as well. Georgia has partially defortified. North Carolina's not even in play. Well, that gets you pretty close now, doesn't it? What I'm seeing here is that if anything, Trump has a major advantage. I give him a 90% chance of winning re-election. If the election were held today, it'd be actually higher than that. And I don't know that fortification can actually overcome it. I think that the deep state might end up forced into a corner where their last resort is violence, which we've seen them do before. By the way, the summer of love riots come to mind, fiery but mostly peaceful. Intimidation tactics, or something worse, by the way. Or that they say, okay, well, Trump will be reelected. We can't stop him this time because we don't have enough ballot printers, basically. And they have to simply try to lean on members of Congress to cock-block him. I would point out that when people say, well, that's why you shouldn't vote for Trump, they get blackpilled. Well, he's just going to be obstructed anyway. Yeah, but there are a few issues on which he can still shine. There's already a federal court precedent allowing him to allocate funds to the border. That's fairly important at the moment, I would think, considering that crisis. He can still conduct diplomacy pretty much at a whim. That's important. He can talk to Kim Jong-un and de-escalate that situation. Maybe he can change the mind of the Israelis and the Palestinians. That would be good. and the Republicans will not obstruct him on extending his tax relief. Those three things alone would justify voting for Donald Trump, in my personal opinion. I will be voting for him. We'll be talking in today's live stream about the Veep stakes, of course. That's meaning less to me because I've already decided who I'm voting for. Trump could die today, and I would probably still just write him in anyway. It wouldn't even make any difference to me. That's about all. Peace out.